TGR.
So as we all know, guys, Breath of the Wild 2 is going to be coming out next year. Right? It got delayed, right? I don't even remember. But anticipations are very high. I'm very excited to play the game just as much as most people that enjoyed the first one. But as we know, there was a lot of design choices with Breath of the Wild 1 that prevented it from being one of the best games ever. I mean, it's really close. I mean, some people would argue that it is one of the best games ever. Personally, it had a bunch of issues, and I think a lot of you will agree with me. So, I asked you guys earlier on Discord, or at least not you guys, but the pay-to-win channel, right? Our patrons, our Twitch members, subscribers, and our YouTube members. I asked you guys, what are your top 3 things that you would want the Breath of the Wild sequel to fix? And I saw that somebody mentioned, Spud actually mentioned a good one that I want to go over. Spud says there should be a better structure around how completing the main dungeons affects the end of the game. So he pretty much hated how in Breath of the Wild 1, you got all the 4 main dungeons, and then you essentially got a much easier fight with the final boss, which is Ganon. So he wants something different, right? A different structure to that. That's actually a cool idea. I actually like that. It's one that I hadn't thought about, right? Something that makes it more meaningful, you know, to kind of go through the dungeons and get those bosses out of the way and give it more meaning than just, okay, now the final boss is easier. Thematically and within the story, it made sense. But I do agree that it could have been done, or maybe for the sequel, we could do something a little bit more unique. So I do like that one a lot. Then he says better rewards for secrets and puzzles. That's actually a really good one. Because, as Christo also said, a lot of the rewards that you get are like the poops, the Korok seeds, right? And eventually you find out they're just giant pieces of poop. So Crystal said that they would like to have more side quests, or better side quest designs, or more side quests in general. I like that too. I think those two can kind of go hand in hand with what Spud said, the better rewards for secrets and puzzles. Because in Breath of the Wild, a lot of the rewards that you get aren't exactly, they're not that meaningful. This is going to be a tough conversation to get through because my throat. The rewards in Breath of the Wild aren't the worst, right? They're decent rewards, but the design of the game, the design of the weapon system, which we will talk about, lends itself to the rewards that you get. Because I watched this video that kind of talked about that said like the reason why a lot of open world designers have problems with giving like substantial rewards in their games is because like it's hard. It's very difficult to constantly reward someone without having to reuse assets. And in Breath of the Wild, it seems like their design philosophy is to reward the player by giving them a lot of weapons, right? A lot of shrines, a lot of like puzzles and stuff. You tend to get a lot of weapons. And there's a reason for that, right? There's the whole weapon breaking system. So the weapon breaks and you get the reward, which is another weapon. So you're constantly rewarding these guys, and you could have 2 or 3 or 4 of the same weapons. And that is kind of like how they continuously reward a player. So I agree wholeheartedly. The rewards for secrets and puzzles need to be better. The Korok seeds were fine. They kind of led to more improvements on your character. You know, the shrines, yeah, you get more health. You get more stamina, stuff like that. So it's like, it's fine for the first one, but the sequel definitely needs to fix that. Garrick Lauren on the channel had a few things to say. Mentioned difficulty, that it should scale better, and I think that the difficulty in Breath of the Wild is kind of weird. It starts off very difficult, and by the end of the game, you're so stacked with good weapons and good like armor and stuff that enemies, you know, they don't pose that much of a challenge. It's kind of weird because it's still difficult. You can still die, but it's much harder to die in the end game stuff when you have a lot of the good stuff on. So yeah, I think the difficulty should be different. Maybe if the game somehow notices, like Garrick said, if you have like really high end or end game gear on you, maybe it could scale the opposite way. Maybe it'll be more difficult. I don't know how that would work. I don't know how they would implement that, but that could be something they could look into. Another good thing was if you max out your climbing gear, you can climb while it's raining. That's a cool one because a lot of people did not like that. A lot of people hated that rain would keep you from climbing continuously. Maxing out your climbing gear, making you kind of put an effort into doing that, and then not having to deal with it. That's actually a really, really clever way of keeping the realism of slipping with water, but then also negating it for people that want to put in the work. Very good idea. Crystal, this is one that you said and I liked a lot, and I think it's going to happen. You said you'd love to see some type of flight mechanic, either creature or machine for the sky area. It has to happen. Like, it has to happen. And this is the thing. But it makes so much sense because we see in this trailer, the sky is open. So it's like, you see this, right? Link is falling. And then he's gliding, right? So that to me tells me that there's going to be traversal, right? In these upper areas of the world in the sky. And then you can probably fall all the way down to the bottom. It can't be like Skyward Sword where you had to kind of like, you could travel the sky, but then you had to like go to a point and then go down. It just can't. It has to be seamless. Like, it seemingly looks that way, but only time will tell. So yeah, there has to be some way. And honestly, they released Skyward Sword recently, or rather re-released Skyward Sword on the Switch. What if they just bring a Skyloft, right? What if they tie this universe somehow with the universe of Skyward Sword, right? I mean, it's essentially the same timeline. So it'd be cool if they bring in the Skyloft, the Loft Wings. Jeez, that would be really cool. Garrick also said traditional dungeons, as well as mini dungeons or shrines. That was one of my biggest gripes with the first one. The dungeons that we had in the game were not very good. I'm sorry, like, they weren't awful, but previous Zelda game dungeons are like far superior to what we got in Breath of the Wild. And the shrines, they were fine, but I always found it really funny that people complain about Elden Ring's mini dungeons, which are very much copy and paste. And then they would see the shrines and say, no, these are fine. Like, the shrines, yes, each one has a different puzzle, but they all look the exact same way, right? They all have the same aesthetic, right? They're built differently with different stuff in there, which made it a little bit better to get through. But aesthetically, they're pretty boring to look at. Yeah, I definitely think that that's a good one. Traditional dungeons need to come back. Like, getting through Hyrule Castle at the end, man, let me tell you, getting through Hyrule Castle at the end was fantastic. I loved, because I actually ended up going through like a side. I didn't go through the main gate. I kind of took, I think I took the one of the waterfalls, and then made my way up through the castle. Fantastic. I absolutely loved that experience. One that was mentioned a lot was the larger enemy variety. Yes, absolutely. If there's one thing that a lot of games, have done better since then, is the variety. There's a decent variety in Breath of the Wild, but after 20, 30, 40 hours, you start to see pretty much everything. So I absolutely agree. I would love to see more Guardians, a lot more enemy variety, which we might see, but definitely give us more of a challenge too. I would love to like run into random like corners of the world and fight this like super duper hard mega boss that's not a Lionel, right? The one thing that most people talked about in the channel on Discord was the weapon system. Weapons breaking is awful. I'll be the first one to say it. I'm not a fan of it. I wasn't a fan of it, and I think a lot of people weren't. And the main reason is that it takes away from the joy of finding a really cool weapon and keeping it through your entire playthrough, or for 5 hours or 6 hours. I mean, there's like these legendary weapons you get, and then they break in 30 hits. Like, that just, I hated it so much. And in the design of the game, like I mentioned earlier, there was that video that I watched, and they talked about why they did this. And it makes a lot of sense, right? You kind of have to go through the world. You kind of have to be rewarded for things. And what is the one supply? What is the one thing in the game that you're going to be running out of almost always? It's your weapons, because they break so fast. So you gotta essentially overwhelm the players with many of them. And then you get repeats in the world. So it's like, okay, cool. You can have like 5 of the flame, the giant flame great swords, which is fine. I mean, whatever, it's there. But it's not the same. It doesn't feel the same as having your weapon, identifying with that weapon and how it plays and stuff like that, and using it for the rest of the game, which Elden Ring does fantastically, right? What Elden Ring does differently is that it uses the Ashes of War, which came from weapon arts in Dark Souls 3, and those weapon arts were attached to those specific weapons in that game. In Elden Ring, they just took those and kind of generalized them, and you could use them in a bunch of different weapons, changing not only what you could do with the weapon, but also like certain stats, certain effects and stuff like that. It worked. It worked wonderfully between Ashes of Wars, and then you, of course, you can also be like a mage and stuff, so you can find spells in Elden Ring. So it's obviously way more varied than Breath of the Wild, which is fine. But for Breath of the Wild 2, we definitely need something different. The weapon degradation system has to be overlooked, or not overlooked. It has to be looked at and like overhauled, because man, I did not enjoy it. I think it needed a lot of work and it didn't feel good. I don't know how they could counter it. I don't know if they could just make the weapons last a lot longer, right? Or somebody mentioned crafting. Maybe you could like fix the weapon, give you a certain item maybe that you could like just kind of fix the weapons and then you kind of keep using them. Or like if they break, like they don't break forever. They could break kind of like in Monster Hunter, how you have like where you sharpen your weapon. Like the sharper that it is, it does the most damage. And if it loses its sharpness, it does less damage. You can bounce off enemies. Maybe they could take ideas from that. It'd be very cool. But I really don't know, right? I'm not a Nintendo game designer. I don't know what their ideas are for this. But that is, I think, the biggest flaw in all of Breath of the Wild. So it's something that a lot of people didn't like, and I think it's something that's going to be looked at. It has to be. If it isn't, major disappointment going in. At the very least, give us the damn Master Sword. But the Master Sword looked broken in one of the teaser trailers that they showed too. So, yeah, I guess we'll see. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm really excited for Breath of the Wild 2. I think that it has a lot of potential. And now that it's been delayed to next year, with the release of Elden Ring this year, maybe they can take a lot of cues from that. Maybe if it's not too late into the development, maybe they can implement some stuff from the game. Who knows? And I'm not saying that Elden Ring is the greatest open world game ever, but it and Breath of the Wild are both heralded as some of the best in that subgenre of open world. So it would be wise to learn from other people, from your competition. Learn from it. Look at it and say, hey, I want to take the best parts from this and implement it in my way. So here's to hoping Breath of the Wild 2 is fantastic.
Hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to see more and stay up to date, subscribe, hit the little bell, and join our Discord.
If you want to support the channel, please check out our Patreon or hit the join button below. As always, thanks for your support and thanks for watching.